Hey everyone, and welcome back to Brothers of the Arcana. As usual, I am Alex Aldea.
I am your co-host, Dave Ferrigno.
And with us this afternoon, we have...
I'm Nick Stevens. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. This is Captain Nick Stevens, U.S. Army retired.
Previous life,
former Ranger.
Yep.
And author of the wonderful book entitled
Combat Bureaucrat.
Combat Bureaucrat. Pushing pencils under fire.
Yep.
Awesome. I've read that book, or most of it, and I have with our ceaseless research, we have come up with some amazing questions for you on this fine show. Nick happens to be a personal friend, and we are going to chat. Hey, we're going to chat with him today about all things military and industrial and complex and simple, and about people and men and about drones. So we got all kinds of things. Dave, start us off because I'm babbling.
Those wonderful NJ drones. Is that where we're going today? So, well, I obviously, first of all, thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you.
It's truly anybody that serves this country, especially, putting their self in harm's way. We truly appreciate. We have such gratitude and admiration for everyone out there. And, thank you to you and everybody, who's come before you and after you as well. So we'll just put that out there first. Yeah. So from that perspective, Fleetly, the drones of New Jersey, that's been a hot topic in the news lately. What would you say from your past life, as you put it?
Yeah.
Do you think it's military? Do you think it's government? Do you think this is aliens? Where are we going?
No, clearly aliens. Alex and I were talking about this a little bit earlier today, and honestly, I had kind of missed story beats. It's so funny that so much of our news cycle just gets swallowed up in the national stories and everything. Mm-hmm. Something very strange right outside your door doesn't get covered. I think I had to scroll a little bit before I was like, wait, I live in New Jersey. wait a tick. But judging from really kind of the lack of unified response from the government, it leads me to believe it's probably us, at some level. And a lot of these agencies, a few of them in particular, are notorious about not talking to
yes.
one another. The CIA, of course, comes to mind. And then, I have some stories about them in Afghanistan, but
oh, geez.
Yeah, just more not stories, basically. You got finding out after the fact what they were doing, type stuff, and then the Secret Service is another one too that you really doesn't share a lot of information.
Well,
we just had a new president get elected who has a lot of holdings in New Jersey too. I would not be surprised if it's something with the Secret Service, but really all I have is conjecture.
Right. Yeah, I don't think we have any insider information on that front. But one thing, it's interesting because in the last couple of days, the narrative shifted a little bit. You got the Pentagon saying it's definitely aliens. Then you have, now there's
Project Blue Beam.
Yes, Project Blue Beam has come up many times now. But there's also this whole rhetoric going on currently that they think that there's some kind of nuclear waste that has gone missing. There's also rhetoric that supposedly there was a nuclear warhead from Ukraine that may have made its way over to the United States. Is this going to be more of a black swan, false flag kind of thing? Who knows? But, I think, is it psychological warfare? Who knows? It's, but I've personally seen a bunch of these drones because I live right next to Morristown Airport practically. And, I just kind of wave to them every time they fly by. It's I'm not worried about it, but it seems like the entire world, you look at our Ring cameras and everybody posts every second of the day. It's just oh my God, I saw a drone. It's actually that's a 737. It's a United flight. But hey, I guess everybody forgets Newark Airport and Teterboro. You got obviously JFK LaGuardia. Even that post last week I saw on X, there was, off the coastline, they were showing all these lights in the sky and they're like, oh, it's definitely UAPs. And it's just like, well, that's also the flight pattern into JFK tonight. So maybe that could be something as well.
You always find more stuff when you're looking for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Isn't that the truth?
It's strange how that works. Yeah.
So, two things on that. Number one, my good buddy, who's a recent addition to the fraternity. So as most guys know, we're Freemasons, Dave and myself. Nick is not, but maybe someday, Nick. Maybe someday.
Unwashed Philistine.
You play your cards right. You too could waste your time at a lot of installations and everything. No. It's actually a lot of fun. We have a really good time in the fraternity, but you have to have the time for it. And with two young kids, it's tough to get things out there. But my point is that there's a lot of guys with a lot of opinions, especially as regards that type of stuff. You get into conspiracy theories and such. We recently met at the installation for Acacia Lodge at St. John's a couple of days ago. A young guy who's a Mason from Massachusetts, New Hampshire area. He deals in decommissioning nuclear sites. And so it's exactly, we want to have him on the podcast talking about this stuff because, if they're saying, well, there's stuff that's missing, there's 3 reactors currently in New Jersey. And there's apparently talk about putting in some more. And his whole thing is, well, what do you do with these nuclear, these parcels or packages of nuclear waste or depleted rods, which apparently you can do all kinds of things to these rods. You're not allowed to do them in America, but in France and other places, these rods aren't quite really depleted. So you could do something to reinvigorate them, and then you can use them again. But you reusing these things, you're not allowed to do in America, or whatever the case may be. And he told me something very interesting, because they always say when they decommission or they turn off the reactors, you see all the fish, and they've died, and the radiation's killed the fish. No, it wasn't. It was hot water that is coming out of there, and the fish really like the hot water. And when the hot water's done or gone, those fish die. And so, it's that kind of thing. So it's kind of nutty. But
a nuclear reactor is really just an elaborate steam engine. Like with extra steps. So a lot of people like to throw in all the the fantastical, the three-headed or three-eyed Simpsons fish, with it's now that.
Does the thing have a name? I mean, it's been around forever.
No,
you'd imagine
it should at that point, right? I don't think it does.
Little 3-eye.
As a Simpsons expert, I should know.
We brought you on to talk about the Simpsons. Yeah, vast knowledge.
Hard left turn here.
Absolutely.
Oh, look. The three-eyed fish on The Simpsons is called Blinky.
Oh, there you go.
Well, Blinky, yes, three-eyed fish found on The Simpsons. Wonderful. Vote Quimby. Absolutely. Thank you, our erstwhile stalwart producer. Yep. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it, Christian. So with that, the show's about esoteric topics, to some extent, some kind of men's issues or just people issues. How do we get from point A to point B being enlightenment, and things of that nature. So you have gone through quite a lot of stuff in your life, whether it's early stuff or going into the military space. And I dare say that has affected you in different ways and different ideas. You've written a book about it, which means you cared enough to do all that research and put those ideas out into formation. So let me ask you this. How did your experiences in Afghanistan sort of shape your personal development? In other words, what lessons did you sort of learn that you had before about resilience, about leadership, about adaptability during your deployment?
So, any combat deployment, right? Like any time you're, in the military, like you gear your entire existence towards that thing, right? And then you do it. The only thing I could liken it to is you can read about it, you can learn as much as you can. It never prepares you for the experience, right? Like no matter how much training or how much they try to make it realistic, it's kind of like being a parent. Right? Like people can talk about it. You can read all the books and everything, but until you've done it, Like you're not really going to know what it's like to go on day 5 of hardly any sleep and kids screaming in the background, and you get to play the game. Is that poop or is that chocolate? Like until you've been there, it's hard. It's hard to conceptualize.
How often does that game get to actually tasting poop or chocolate?
It's too fresh. Too soon. So a lot of the strategies they give you and everything, they don't work. They don't work, or you find new ones along the way and everything too. I was fortunate. I was an officer, right? So I was a captain. I was in charge of a company size element, right? Worked as a second in command, as a first lieutenant for a bit. So I had quite a few soldiers under me. So I didn't really have to focus on myself that much. Everything was always like, are these soldiers fed? Are they safe? Are we able to do our mission? Right? Like, can we achieve all of these things, right, within a reasonable, and then for half a second, I got to think about myself and I passed out like at night. That was kind of it. So really the coping strategies, the mechanisms of self-development and growth, everything kind of came afterward. Coming back, redeployment, reintegration, all that stuff like that. That's where you kind of had to figure out what worked and what didn't, right? So, and I'll tell you, I went through a lot of what didn't.
Well, that's part of it, right? So when you say reintegration, it's easy to reintegrate. Well, like I say, easy. It's easier to reintegrate into society on any meaningful level. Finding a job, learning to have a relationship, all the various things that you're sort of expected to do, but reintegrating mentally, and even if you reintegrate into a schedule, having that, turning off that animalistic side of you that's just doesn't care anymore because you're in war, disassociative or whatever the case may be, and on some level allowing that to, well, let me not assume anything. Is it easily done? Can you come back to true kind of thing after these types of things?
Yes and no, because you've affected when you go through combat, right? Like when you've been through, and I was in a combat unit. I was a paratrooper in the 173rd. So we had a year-long deployment, like at the time. So the vast majority of that, I'd say about 10 months out of that, other than when the passes were frozen, effectively. Taliban didn't like to fight when it was frozen. So you're dealing with some form of contact, whether you're getting bombarded, you're dealing with firefights, ambushes, whatever, for about 10 months, right? And you redefine what true is. You redefine what your baseline is. So there isn't this. It's trying to like unexplode a hand grenade, right? Like that's done. Like you're not that person anymore. There is no home anymore to return to, right? Because you've blown it up effectively, right? So finding what to do with like what you have left, I think is kind of like the strategy for it, right? The closest thing I could probably equate it to would be, have you ever talked to like really hardcore drug addicts, like people who've done like heroin?
Yeah,
Sure. Like that too. And then they have like their first kid or something like that. They're like, wow, holding my kid's pretty cool. Almost as cool as that time I did heroin. Like it changes everything, right? So when I came back, everything felt like a cartoon, right? Like getting a job, answering, with a straight face, like police officer questions when I was speeding or something like that. like things that people take very seriously. It's like an 8 or a 9, like they're like 2s. Everything simmered at a 2, and it felt like I had a coloring book with no lines. Like I came back and it was just like, none of this is real. Over there, that was real. This is Mickey Mouse stuff. Like, what is this? And then trying to come back, finding that home, finding meaning, finding your normal again. Right? That's the readjustment piece. That's it right there. And that's long. And origin. I'm still working on it. I'll let you know how it goes. But it's been 12 years. So.
Well, is that why a guy like John Basilone or something like would continually crave out going back to the battlefield, like even after he got the Medal of Honor
Absolutely.
and all that stuff.
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Like, do you want to? I don't want to say he wanted to die because I don't think he wanted to die, but he craved the experience of that, like the visceral adrenaline. And they hadn't done bungee jumping at that point, so I guess he didn't have that to fall back on, so to speak.
Hang gliding wasn't
I guess
in vogue yet.
Nope.
No, so like you definitely, because if you're away from that, it's almost like the silence is deafening, right? And then you have to stop being that person. Well, every iota of your being has been shaped to be that person, and now you're no longer there fulfilling the purpose with which you were filled. And then now you have to figure stuff out. And that, I think, is like the crux of the problem for a lot of these guys, myself included, right?
So do you think a lot of that has to do, is it because of the adrenaline and like you're making the point? Like obviously you get pulled over or something. It's like, well, there's a huge difference between being in a firefight with the Taliban and, a police officer saying, hey, you're doing 73 back there in a 55. Like, what the hell?
You're in trouble. Yeah.
But I mean, from that perspective too, is it also because in the military things are so regimented? You have a schedule. Because like there's such a structure to. Well, maybe there's a structure to things. Like I guess when you're over combat, not necessarily. But do you think that has something to do with that, or is it just really just the reintegration? And I can't speak from experience, so.
The excellent points. Like I can really only speak to my personal experience. I operated as a cab scout, so a cavalry scout.
Sure.
So we did RISTA type stuff, which is reconnaissance, surveillance, and target acquisition, everything. So we did a lot of, we were given a lot of latitude, right?
Sure.
So a lot of guys, especially in like line platoons, infantry companies and stuff like that are very regimented with what they do. Like, you will do this thing in front of you until I tell you to stop, and it's very high discipline, everything too. We had elements of that for sure. I don't want to say we're out like cowboys or anything, but we were given a lot more latitude with stuff. We're like, hey, this is generally what we need you to do. Here's the mission. We need it done by X. Here's your left and right boundaries. Do not cross them. And I'll check in tomorrow. Don't disappoint me. It was kind of like our rhythm for stuff,
So you had is it fair to say if life is like a coloring book with no lines, that's like a black and white book with only lines, basically, and no color.
And you're filled with purpose, right? Like, because everything you're doing, everything everyone around you is doing is pulling in this one direction, right? And then you come back to, well, if I go to work today, I'll get to do those reports, or I could just stay in bed and then maybe I'll get a phone call and like, where are you? And then there's really no consequence, like comparatively, right? And you have to,
it's interesting.
You have to find within everything feeling like a 2 or 3, you have to find that 10-point scale.
Yeah.
You have to readjust back to that. That to me kind of summarizes reintegration, coming back.
Yeah. Those TPS reports, he just didn't get them done on time.
They didn't fill.
You didn't get the memo.
Yeah.
Well, it's so funny because, I mean, you see, when you're a kid and you get taught about religion, let's say your cup is like a thimbleful, so it's easy to fill it up with the philosophy of religion, the dogma of everything else. And then you believe it because you're told to and things like that. You get older and now you have to come to grips with what do you believe, because your cup is now bigger, right? And it's not filled up anymore with the basic tenets of whatever it was that they poured into you. It sounds like in the military, they pour your purpose into you at the beginning.
Whatever size cup you got, they're going to fill it.
They're going to fill it with a fire hose, right?
Yeah.
And then you come back out and you're like, well, whatever they're trying to fill me up with at the company at, Intertrode or whatever, Editech, whatever place you're going to, where the TPS reports flow like water, that, yeah. You just end up listening to a lot of Brian. What was it, Brian?
What?
The dude. He celebrates his entire catalog. Anyway, he was a musician back in the 80s.
Oh, you mean
not Brian Adams. I'm thinking Brian Adams for not Brian Adams. Anyway, I think. So what is your... they gave you a style of leadership in the Army. They said captains do this, right? Whatever captains do, especially if you're a Ranger captain, then maybe you do something more captainy than other captains.
Quick clarification point real quick, because I'm sure there's going to be somebody in the comments sections. like I am, before anyone looks me up, I am Ranger qualified, meaning that I graduated from Ranger school. I was a paratrooper in the United States Army. To be a Ranger, technically, right, to say I was a Ranger and everything, you have to be in Ranger Regiment.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
Which is 75th Ranger Regiment. They have a few battalions. I was never there, so angry at me. I had the little tab on my thing.
Well, but I mean, you're no less qualified than anybody. You passed the qualifications. You just weren't in the regiment per se. Didn't do those things.
Right.
Per se.
So it's not to be a pedant, right? But like there is a distinction there, and I
No, understood.
don't want to take away from those guys or add to myself, right? So,
Right. Absolutely. In your practices, in your leadership, either in the Army or out.
Right.
So now you work for a company or in the corporate world.
a major company.
A major company. And you exhibit leadership there as well.
Supposedly, yes.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Do you incorporate any esoteric or unconventional type of practices into your leadership style or the way that you choose to interact with folks?
I don't believe so. The literal definition of esoteric is like what for the inside, for the inner circle.
Sure.
Is effectively what it means. So I guess in that loose definition, I kind of do, right? Because I'm taking these things that were for a very small percentage of us, right? Like Army officers and everything too. And I'm translating that to, how do I reach these corporate people to, when they get up there and they talk about leadership, what they're really actually talking about is management, right? They're talking about management. A lot of them wouldn't know leadership if it bit them in the face. But it's a different thing, and I'm using these outside techniques. And to your point earlier, the Army doesn't necessarily, and I would assume for the other branches too, they don't necessarily be like, this is our leadership. Here's your leadership pill. You're going to take it. They give you a lot of the tools to put in your tool bag, and like your overall like tool belt, tool bag, toolbox, whatever you want. That vessel, right? That is your leadership, right? And it's only as good as what's in there and how well you apply it. They taught us stuff from leading by example, which is not always appropriate, right? You don't always need to do that. Administrative leadership, right? Like how can you sit back and be like a Dwight Eisenhower kind of character and like really task appropriate like all the different pieces and get it together. Coercion is one. Intimidation is another tool.
Just put that down anyway.
Yeah, whatever.
These are all things that we use, and they're not all appropriate all the time for the right person, the right situation, right?
Sure.
So it's all, how are you going to use it? So I've got a lot in there that it does not show up, and you don't go and get your MBA and they teach you this stuff.
No,
right?
sure.
So it's some fits, some doesn't, right? Like we used to always say there's three ways to learn things, right? There's repetition. One, there's repetition. Two, there's blunt force trauma. And then three, there's a combination of 1 and 2. Great.
Sure.
That philosophy doesn't apply to, can't really do that in corporate. So,
well, what would you say? You were talking about leadership versus management.
Yeah.
So what would you say is the most effective ways of leading versus management style then? Because I think in the corporate world, there's a lot of managers that aren't necessarily great leaders.
Right. Well, because they've never seen it, right? Like, so leadership is, and it's through no fault of their own, right? Everybody gets up every day. They want to do the best job that they can. Right?
Sure.
Like more often than not. But they don't know. And like, we have a habit too of like reaching for the top word, the best word, like I'm a good manager. No, I'm a leader. I'm a pathfinder with this or what, like.
And now it's servant leader.
Yeah.
So everyone's humble bragging.
Altruism.
Yes.
Vanguard of whatever. You're not. Like, because we can't all be superlative. That's just not how that works, right? Like, but I think we need to define what are we talking about between leadership and management, right? Because that even gets lost too, right? And I think that the easiest way to really kind of differentiate the two, management is about retention. It's about keeping efficiency and everything. So 2 plus 2 is going to equal 4 or as close to 4 as we can keep it without any spoilage or loss or inefficiency. We're going to, if you can get it 3.99999, you're a great manager doing a good job. You're keeping your eye on the ball. You're making sure your underlings are doing what they're supposed to do, et cetera, et cetera. Leadership, and why leadership is more valuable, is a type of alchemy. In so much as you get more out of its constituent parts. You make 2 plus 2 equals 5 or 6 or 7, right? That's what leadership actually is, right? And that is hard to do, right? It's getting people in the right positions inside your organization who have that toolbox with a lot of tools, right? Who know how to apply each one to each person, each situation accordingly. It is difficult to actually have throughout an organization.
100%.
Yeah.
It's interesting you bring that up. And I want to talk more about historical stuff because you and I we're talking Nazis on the way down.
God.
Oh boy. We're going off the rails today, folks.
I'm getting demonetized.
Well, you have an incredible command of World War II history, World War I history,
Appreciate it.
and other wars as well. And you and I talk about me being Romanian. I'm always fascinated by Eastern European history and talking about some of that with you and even talking about popes and other stuff on the way down. But I remember during the Nuremberg trials, so there's Rudolf Hess and then there's Hoss, right? Hoess, which was the commandant of Auschwitz.
Right.
This guy fascinated me because of his testimony, and it goes right to management versus leadership. Thoughts. He was there and he wanted to say, as he was being asked questions about what happened at Auschwitz and everything, he said, I want to make it very clear, we did not mistreat the Jews. We did not mistreat. We were there with a mission, and that mission was to exterminate. That's what I was tasked to do, but we did not mistreat them. And that was important to him psychologically on that issue because as you could say a manager par excellence in that respect, he knew what his parameters were, and he said, we did not go outside those parameters. It didn't matter to him what the parameters were, how crazy or insane or monstrous, right? But he kept to what he was asked to do, and he did it to the best of his ability, which is the craziness of bureaucracy in certain respects, obviously. But
yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about that as an idea of management gone awry?
Really teeing me up for something great here. No, it just like it goes to show you the lengths of like mental gymnastics people will go through to justify what they're doing, right? And also would point out too that like, is anyone speeding at the Indy 500 if everyone is speeding, right? So this guy's looking around and he's, when everyone has lost their mind effectively, like he's the most sane person there, and he had to carry that distinction with him too. It's just truly awful that like somebody could get to that point and justify it in front of a tribunal.
Oh, yeah.
It's not like in a casual conversation. Yeah. He was standing in front of the gallows, effectively, like saying this and everything too. Mm-hmm. It's just shows you the level of indoctrination and everything that these people, went through. And classic line too. But like the first country the Nazis invaded was their own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
And they did so not just at a physical level, but an intellectual political level too. That kind of thought process could be propagated, right? Like that's truly monstrous. But yeah, that's somebody who, this is my task. I'm going to do it, and then did not look beyond that whatsoever, right? And then you get enough of those people like that, and terrible things can happen, right?
Yeah. I'm going to go down a weird path here. If I haven't already.
Not enough.
So the question becomes, after the war is over, Operation Paperclip kicks in. Yep. And for those that don't know about Operation Paperclip, that was the area where we took a lot of German scientists, military types, and others, and utilized their expertise to make America into what ultimately ended up being the superpower that it is.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, that's just what happened. That's the truth. But my question becomes, how much of, let's say, leadership styles of the Wehrmacht seeped into army leadership? Like, did we change as a military force after that with influences? Because you have, obviously, the Frankfurt School of Philosophy, which came up with the idea of critical theories of all kinds, including quote-unquote critical race theory that came upon later, which spurred its own sort of, quasi-revolution in America in recent times. That seeped into our philosophy. So why wouldn't Wehrmacht tactics and leadership principles seep into our American military philosophy, right?
So, in the military and the army, especially for officers, we did our level best, and we were told to be apolitical with everything. We weren't allowed to have political opinions, social media, and everything. I'm sure it's changed since I've been out, but while I was in, we were pretty much like a political non-entity. Whatever your idea was or what you thought, but you kept it to yourself, right? You just were not allowed to talk about any of this stuff. But when I was in, there's also, so a lot of people don't understand that political component to it or apolitical component, but there's also an academic component to being an officer. We would write papers and everything. We would discuss and journals and stuff like that. And originally I was trained as an armor officer, right? So we had to learn about armored warfare in theory, right? And I've had to read Panzerleader. I've had to read Heinz Guderian. I've read memoirs from Rommel and stuff like that, all these guys. So a lot of how the U.S. Army actually fights, especially with armored warfare doctrine and everything too, is lifted straight off of what the Germans did in World War II. A lot of their, what better example when in a lot of battles they're outnumbered 3, 5, 10 to 1 and win. Yeah. Right. Like how? Right. Like we want to learn how. Right. Like good ideas. You can separate them from. Separate art from the artist, so to speak, right? So we would absolutely take those playbooks too. Like, our a case in point, right? So if you were to take the M60, a general purpose machine gun that we had for years and years, right? Popular throughout Vietnam. It was being phased out in the early 2000s whenever I was in. And you were taking MG42, was captured, say, outside of Berlin, right? Open up the breech, it's identical. Same thing. Cool. We just slowed down the rate of fire, because it shoot through ammo. Yeah, and you had to change the barrel constantly, right? So yeah. So, we're not adverse to taking good ideas, right? Be it from anybody. Right?
A good idea is a good idea.
Yeah, and they absolutely had some fantastic revolutionary theories and tactics they applied on the battlefield to great effect too. And by the end of the war, we actually start to see a lot of the Western allies too using blitzkrieg tactics, like most famously Patton and Omar Bradley too, on the American side. And then in the East, you have like Zhukov, right? Those guys, and some of the other their field marshals too that are using effectively, very similar tactics too, with the goal to encircle and cut off entire swaths of the German front line, right? Although Soviets are a little different with deep battle, right? But it's one of my personal favorites. I don't know how much time we have to.
We have time.
What's deep battle?
So deep battle, right? So the difference in doctrine. So blitzkrieg, right? Like war, I'm sure everybody knows, right? Blitzkrieg deals with penetrating at what's called a heavy point or Schwerpunkt within the enemy's line, pouring through there and encircling the front line, and then cutting them off from reinforcement, right? And utterly destroying them, or pushing on further towards strategic areas, right? Deep battle does that, but everywhere. It does it everywhere along the front line. It actually has like a front line attack that will create essentially small pores, micro pores within the enemy front line. And from those like small breakthroughs, then the mobile reserve will breach through. So whereas you're trying to go through with like a needle through the front line with a blitzkrieg, right? The deep battle pours acid on it and just dissolves the whole thing to where they just, the Soviet idea is that they just ignore your front line altogether and just attack straight through to the rear and destroy all your logistics and rear echelon and everything. This is what everyone was terrified of for a land battle in Western Europe during the Cold War years, right? They did not want to engage with the Red Army's deep battle tactics with their waves of tanks and shock troopers.
So that's a great point. And my favorite episode of James Bond, Octopussy, gets exactly at this point. General Orlov, played by Stephen Burkett, comes up with the idea of basically pushing on into Europe with all of the Soviet forces. Now, we had 7 Corps that was there, our famous tank.
Army 7 Corps.
Yeah, Army 7 Corps. The huge tank divisions that were supposed to hold back. How long do you think we'd have made it against the Russians if they actually had intended to do what General Orlov wanted to do?
Not long at all.
So we were anywhere near ready for that.
I actually got to see a lot of the silos that the Soviets had when I was there in the Czech Republic and everything too. They were right there. There was quite a few of them too. So obviously they wouldn't go straight to a nuclear response immediately, right? But their whole thing was to just advance as quickly as possible and push past all of that too. And a lot of our doctrine was defensive, like delay tactics, elastic defense and stuff like that too, just to buy time, right? So I really think weeks at most. Yeah. Now bear in mind though, I was just a captain. I wasn't, didn't have the big hat with all the stars on it,
Oh, the scrambled eggs and all that.
You didn't have your inflatable army in Africa?
Yeah, not so much.
But that's pretty crazy stuff. What drove you to write the book?
Really just, it was living rent free in my head. So as a type of therapy too, right? So I originally went to college for, I have a psychology degree, right? So I really, unlike a lot of my peers, I didn't really have as much of a stigma about getting help or talk therapy right afterward too. So I sought that out. And my therapist at the time actually recommended that I write some of it down. And as a very amateurish writer, I was like, oh, this is actually turning into a book. I might as well just write down everything that happened into some kind of informative and entertaining format. And that's kind of the genesis of the book. Yeah.
So do you still, after you wrote the book, do you still journal as a method of coping or, whatever you want to call it, like your own, accepting the world as it is?
Less and less though, it is just trite and flippant as it's going to sound. So gratitude journals actually do help quite a bit.
Really?
They actually do. I make a daily habit of it.
Okay.
Keeping just minor, small things, right? Just acknowledging that like this is a good thing and it happened and I'm happy for it and everything too. Helps keep you grounded and more present too, as silly as that sounds. I know, like a cliche here.
No,
I wouldn't say it's silly or cliche. I think more individuals needs to practice gratitude in this world. And I think from a spiritual and a journey perspective, even if you haven't served in the military or gone through these traumatic situations, I think journaling and that type of realm can really help people. Because I think it's also put something tangible on paper. So you could go back and say, hey, a year ago, this is what I was struggling with. And you could use that as a marker and measurement, right? It's certainly something that could help. And
it's a good time to slow down too. And it's nice. You can control that time and space too, which is good too. Because a lot of things just come at us and we're reacting a lot throughout the day. So it's good to take that, and it's also a nice little self-inventory piece too.
Right.
You can really, and it's a small thing that you can do, just a minute or two a day. I write it on a Post-it note. Like I just have a stack of Post-it notes next to my desk. So,
yeah, that certainly works though, right? It's effective.
Yeah. Yeah, as far as any other, serious writing into my experiences with the military and everything, no, I haven't done any more of that. I feel that I got out what I needed to get out, because I honestly, before I had written it all down, I was reliving a lot of the stuff often. Like, it would replay. I would feel like I was back there. I was constantly thinking through what ifs and stuff.
Sure.
Like that. It was really, your past can really kind of take over your present if you're not careful.
So, obviously, don't want to elicit any negativity or anything else. Is there anything you'd like to, kind of put out there? Like, is there certain, stories you want to tell or whatever else? We're not asking you to go out of your comfort zone either. So by no means.
Oh, like a war story? You guys?
Sure.
You guys want to? Okay. All right. I'll tell you.
I'm always partial to the Zoomy one, but
I'll tell you. Yeah, I'll tell you a fun story. I'll tell you Zoomy. So, we, because we're the Army and we're intellectually challenged, we were not trusted to run some of our, higher end equipment. So we had like a TAC sat, right? So there's like satellite uplink equipment and everything too. And the Air Force is like, no. We'll send a guy who will run that, and that will be his thing and everything.
you can't have your knuckle draggers, out there goofing it up.
Filling up on crayons and then trying to,
I thought that was mostly the Marines filling up on crayons. But
Oh, I am partial to crayons myself. But they send this guy out here and he just 100% just Air Force base kid, never left, just 1,000%, like straight out of high school. I'm enjoying the Air Force.
Sure.
Coke bottle glasses and everything too. And we're just like, what's your name? He's like, Airman. Like, your name's Zoomy, And he's like, that's not my name. I'm like, well, aircrafts go Zoom, and you're the only Air Force person here. So welcome aboard, Zoomy. And we ruined that kid. We absolutely by the end of it, right? Like, and the Air Force has a reputation compared to the Army and everything of being, and the Marines, clean cut, like a little more highbrow and everything too. They're the ones you want to take home to mom, right?
right.
By the end of it, we had him cursing, doing dip, every bad habit you could possibly think of. And we eventually put him on the wall and everything too. And we got him because so few people in the Air Force actually experience frontline combat and everything too. Their requirements to get a lot of their awards and stuff were a lot less stringent than ours. So we put him in several engagements too. We put him on the wall within reason, of course.
Sure.
We want to get him killed. So we actually had him return fire to the enemy and stuff like that too. So we'd like to think that when we got him out of there, when he rotated out, and he did get out safely for everyone listening, it was fine. When he got back to his base, that he was just the most badass, Air Force kid, on that base, all his combat stuff,
You look like Chesty Puller.
Yeah. I was like, you're going to be the Audie Murphy of whatever Air Force base you walked out of. That was our plan. So
excellent.
Yeah, we ruined him for life.
I love that story because you turn him into a man in a certain sense. In the idea of if I could be non-politically correct for a second, and I usually am. In that sense, so there's a leadership style just to that. I mean, that guy had a journey, a massive journey as a human being, coming from a very stringent, very, very sheltered existence.
Yeah, we're this kid's cloistered. Yeah.
To now he's just this maniac, but not really.
Soon be the maniac.
Well, he's able to marry those two parts of himself, hopefully, somewhat seamlessly.
Yeah.
But there's a leadership track to that. Who came up with that as an idea, first of all, and how was that implemented in the sense that, because you must have had a thought about how you were going to approach this, right?
Well, like any great idea, it just kind of happens organically, right? The nature kind of pulled itself that way. I think it was me and a couple of the NCOs that were there with me, and then headquarters were just like, wouldn't it be great if, I'm not even sure which one of us came up with the idea, but we immediately dogpiled on it. We're like, oh, we're loading up that mine cart and pushing it down the rails. Absolutely. That was the gestation of that.
Okay.
Nice.
Now there's a Zoomy 2, isn't there? That
Part 2, Electric Boogaloo. Yep.
that's right. So same deal with him, or
We didn't get a chance to, because he was off cycle from us. And at the time, I think they were doing 6-month or 3-month deployments or something like that. I forget. But, we're there for a year. So we actually had another one come in. And we were really under a lot of heavy attack from the Taliban. So this was during the elections that we would run in the fall. So we do, trying to restore democracy, right? So we do the elections every single fall in Afghanistan. And the Taliban, of course, would have to respond in kind. So they would hit all the bases. They would hit all the outposts and everything, too. And then they would try to, attack the election sites. We'd have to move the election sites. So it was this big cat and mouse game, right? So he came in during one of our really heavy cycles, right? So we're getting bombarded the entire time. So he actually, he got injured and had to get medevaced. He actually, that one, he actually panicked. I had to go get him out from under a structure. Right. So you have hardened bunkers and everything too, that they're actually designed to withstand mortar and rocket attack and stuff too. And he was under not like a trailer type structure too. So I had to go get him too. And he was kicking and screaming at me. It's fun times.
I guess they didn't teach that in the Air Force. It's just no, that's a mobile trailer. Don't want to be there.
And before I fall into the trope of, Army guy bashes on Air Force or whatever, I've seen Army guys panic.
Oh, sure.
I've seen everybody, and even guys who've been in it, been in combat a few times. You never know how you're going to react every single time.
Right.
To some days it just you're less likely to.
Right.
I've had moments where I've frozen.
Yeah.
It happens. And that was my job. Right.
Sure.
It was more likely to happen at the start, but it. So it happens to the best of us too. So no hard feelings. Air Force.
No, absolutely not. We're not ragging on any of the branches of the military here.
you told a different story of an officer that got compliance at the barrel of a gun. I don't know if you remember that story. You told it when he came over to the lodge. I don't remember the particulars. I was hoping you would, but basically where he was asked to do something, or he was tasking somebody to do something, and that person, whether it was a reservist or something else, didn't want to do what they were asked to do, and there was some pushing the guy had to get done in order for that to happen.
Yeah, that's one I probably don't want to get into.
Okay, fair enough.
In a recorded format, but
things happen out there, obviously, that, yeah. But if you have any others you want to share, we'd be happy to listen.
We had, I'll tell you another, we'll end it on a high note here with story time. We had, so a lot of people don't know this, but Afghanistan and I think Iraq too. So both of them together were heavily contracted wars, heavily contracted of conflicts, right? We hired a lot of third-party people to do stuff, to include transport too. Mm-hmm. So there were Russian pilots that we had too, like that would have old hips and stuff like that would fly in and do transport stuff and everything too. We had local Afghans that we would employ too. There were a lot of contractors. We even had some defense contractors come in and be like, "Here's our new whiz bang thing. We're going to install on your vehicles or whatever." And I'm like, "No one talked to me. Fantastic. Okay. Don't know how you got here, but one of these pilots. I want to focus on one of these pilots here. One of these helicopter pilots. Our area was called Shark, Charkh, so Shark District, right, and Logar Province, right. So we're just below Kabul, right. So the whole area was a highway to like get, arms and fighters like into Kabul too. So we're a pretty busy area, and our place, because it was always under attack and like always dealing with all this stuff, we called it the Shark Tank, right? And it developed a reputation pretty quickly. And we eventually got our air shut off, right? Like we eventually had to where like our helicopter landing zone was shut down. Like pilots were taking way too much ground fire. It was too hot, too dangerous, right? So fast forward a month or two, we've had like no air and everything too. One early morning and everything. Like helicopter and everything. I'm like, am I dreaming? Like, what is this? You know, and I go out there. It's one of these Russians in a hip, right? Who has just landed and his English is terrible, right? And he's helicopter's still going and everything. We're like, we can't. We're like, no, like go away. We're trying to like wave him off and everything too. And he's just like, well, you know, like I'm just my terrible accent. But like he's trying to, you know, and he's like, I can't hear you. We're like, no. And he's like, I kill engine, like cuts the engine off. And it takes a few minutes to get a helicopter back up and everything too.
Yeah.
And we're like, this is shark. He's like, oh, like he realized where he was too. And immediately the rockets, like, because it was dawn too. So then like the Taliban, of course, like heard all this too and then saw the helicopter.
Sure.
We start coming under attack and everything too. And I've never seen a helicopter take off that fast. So you look on his face and you realize where the hell he was.
Now, what's a hip exactly?
Chef's kiss. A hip is a Russian transport helicopter. The one in...
Is it like a Chinook?
No. It closer to like a Black Hawk. It's the one in... which Rambo movie is it where he's fighting the Russians in Afghanistan? Is that 3? 2? It's 2?
It's 2.
They all run
with
together.
the explosive
the explosive arrowheads.
Yeah,
They're the
exactly.
ones that they put a bunch of props on to make it look like a hind. Right? Like
Okay.
It's actually a hip.
Interesting.
Oh,
Yeah.
so it's a less... Okay.
It's like a utility helicopter. It's not a combat helicopter. Yeah.
Got it.
I mean, I could just picture this dude come out like smoking a cigarette with like, you know, the hair all screwed up. Like,
Like-
just like, Mother Russia.
It's like Peter Stormare. Again, he's up there in what was that thing before the International Space Station?
Oh,
Yeah, the mirror. The mirror.
The mirror.
Yeah, and he's just like, he's twitching. He's been up there by himself the whole time talking to himself.
Oh yeah, no, I don't know if he did or not, but in my memory, he's got like the Ushanka cat.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, he's got. Oh no, not as an astronaut, but you know.
Oh, my guy.
Oh yeah. He comes out there kalinkaing off the helicopter.
Terrible.
Sorry. You can make fun of Russians. You know, we're basically at war with them. So you know, it's
Fair enough.
Are we though?
well, not really. No. That'll be an interesting thing.
I don't think we are. I think the military-industrial complex is.
Well, they're trying to be.
Yeah.
If they could keep it from going nuclear, I'm sure they'd love it as an idea. But
Well, hopefully our interdimensional beings will stop any nuclear stuff from happening.
yeah, so that's an interesting thing to get into. That I'm sure. It's like we've been keeping this pretty normal. Let's just go batshit bonkers right off the flare.
These go to 11.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Please. I want to have a good time all the time. There's other ways of coping that exist that Nick and I have explored some role-playing scenarios. And before you come to your own conclusions on what that means, it's mostly in the Dungeons and Dragons and Warhammer 40K.
I was going to say, are we talking about like chains and whips, or
No,
like where are we going with this, Alex?
It's your world, Dave, not mine. Yeah. So, but what I'm fascinated and would love to get into on a certain level is how that could help with mental health, with the idea of reintegration, with the idea of a path forward. So Nick is one of the better that I've seen painters of Warhammer 40K figures.
No,
And
thanks you.
he and I play extended campaigns in 40K and tabletop stuff, and hey, no shame in that game, boy.
You're airing out all my nerd stuff. Great.
Well, it's I'm airing out my nerd stuff. If you got to go along on this journey with me, you're welcome.
Yep.
As Weird Al once said, we're white and nerdy.
That's right.
The Grand Warrior poet.
Weird Al Yankovic. Yes, there was Snorri the Elder and Weird Al Yankovic.
Yep.
So what How has that been for you, like personal journey wise? Has that helped?
It's kind of crazy, right? Like as you were talking about that, like so for the normies out there, the so Warhammer is Games Workshop is a British company that does tabletop wargaming with miniatures and everything. They've been doing it for 35 years, I think.
Yeah, it's 40 years. Yeah.
But the idea of like miniature wargaming on tabletop has been around for hundreds of years.
Absolutely.
It really became popularized post World War II. There was a few British commanders that kind of brought it back. But when I played it as a kid, thought it was cool. I was like, wow, a little spaceman that can fight. How neat. Go put all that on hold. Go do my army training and everything too. And during my army training, we had huge tables, huge terrain boards that actually had miniature tanks and everything too. And we would have to go through and do like a fold a gap, the Reds are coming, like type scenario, and give orders and stuff like that too. And they would assess us, the instructors, on how well we read the terrain. Did you call in for air support fast enough? Did you move your reserves, et cetera, et cetera? And I was just like, wow, this is a, affirmation that everything I've done to this point has been right. Yeah. No, it was kind of cool to see that like it actually came from somewhere too, that actually had like a professional origin, right? That it is entirely leisure unto itself, right? But that has been kind of an outlet this whole time too, for everybody's like inner armchair general, right? You can sit and do these things and play and everything in a mental exercise that's bloodless, right? Unless you, I don't know, cut yourself while you're putting them together or whatever.
Pushing pencils under fire. Yeah. But you put an extraordinary amount of care and time into the scenarios that you come up with and stuff like that. And I got to think a lot of that was fostered through the understanding that you got in the military and the way that things behave, how they go. And we were talking about a book only recently that we both are avid readers, especially of fantasy sci-fi literature and stuff like that. And one of the things where it presents itself as some story on some planet, some things, but the amount of actual hard-nosed tactical combat strategy and everything, it all comes from real life. Like that, the whole, you said Tom Clancy, Red October, the ability for him to take his incredible knowledge of tactics and strategy and put it into a fictional story that's fun to listen to and listen. But you're getting, like, as you said, a master class in how do you withstand a siege, right? How do you perpetuate a siege onto an area? What do various tactics look like? So yeah, that's always fascinating stuff.
Well, always the best fantasy, the best fiction, right? Science fiction, whatever, is grounded in reality, right? So one of the reasons in Game of Thrones and George R. I'm not going to say his two R's. George R. Martin's his Song of Ice and Fire series is so successful is because it's the War of the Roses, right? When you have a historical basis for something, right? You have guardrails, you have lines to paint with them, right? Too, so it sells the world. All that more, right? And it gives you something to shoot for and work with, right? So I think that's important, right? Because it's easy just to run off to Narnia, and just write something absolutely crazy. But like even Tolkien's writing, right? Like he dealt a lot with his processing of the Great War to use a World War I veteran, right? So he's dealing
not all the Psalm, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Right. So he had a lot of feelings and a lot of ideas about right and wrong, good and evil, right? Like, he's a little black and white for today's standards, but like he, certainly took away a lot of that. And it all shapes itself, right?
Tolkien once chastised what's his good friend from who wrote Narnia.
Lewis.
Yes, Lewis.
Yeah.
That he was too overt in his Christian style. I mean, you could say that Tolkien was just as dedicated to writing a Christian, Christ-based narrative just not as overt as C.S. Lewis was. But C.S. Lewis, of course, as a convert from atheism, really wrote about that. And are there any atheists in foxholes?
Are there any atheists in foxholes? There are fewer of them. I think combat tends to push people towards God.
Yeah.
A lot of times, even myself, they're like, hey, who needs to take mass, during like really tough training, but like, I'll be Catholic for she'll take a break. But it definitely puts things into perspective, right? It definitely, like not many 18, 22-year-olds get your mortality like right in front of your face. Like, hey, you're going to die. Like eventually, maybe not now, could be now, but you're going to die. Like that's something you have to wrestle with.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a pretty heavy thing to wrestle with, obviously.
Yeah.
Because most 18 to 22-year-olds are out and think they're invincible. But
so yeah, one of the things about being a soldier and being in combat and like how you're okay with it, right? And how you don't just like go crazy every single time is it's going to sound a little nuts. Like you have to be okay with the idea of dying. Like, because otherwise you're going to try to preserve yourself every single time, right? You're not going to do your job, right? You're not going to return fire.
yeah.
Move when you need to move, right? Like you're not going to do the things you need to do to be ultimately successful, right?
Sure.
So it's tough. Like you have to, almost train the humanity out of yourself, like in a way.
Yeah, because I would imagine self-preservation in a lot of those scenarios would actually be detrimental. To your point, if you're behind cover, but you need to move to a foxhole or somewhere that has more reinforcements or whatever else, right? It's
Oh, absolutely. I could imagine being a horrible soldier unless I was indoctrinated properly. I'd constantly be trying to save myself, scrounging whatever I could, as a
Two uniforms on
That's
top,
right,
like
like-
staying more.
yeah. Even when I role played the Dungeons and Dragons scenario, they're like, Alex, why do you have like 7 spears and 4 swords and 2 backpacks? Like you suffer encumbrances like every roll.
I need them.
And I must have it all.
These are my things.
well,
They're precious to me.
Yeah.
Yes, precious.